What's going on, everybody? Travis here, TravisStetzel.com, TrainAggressive.com, and I got a kick-ass aggressive strength interview here. I've been wanting to talk to this guy for a long time, and if you're if you're involved within the powerlifting scene, you definitely know who this guy is, AJ Roberts. So we're going to be digging into some different strength talk here, just talking about lifting heavy shit, getting strong, and then blended in a little bit of high intensity conditioning work via different CrossFit type stuff. And I'm just freaking pumped to kind of dig into your head here a little bit, man. So AJ, thanks for being on the call, brother, and appreciate you taking the time, man.
Yeah, glad to be here, man. Anyone who wants to talk about strength, I'm all ears, and it's what I love to do and love to talk about. So I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it was about a month ago out in California, and I was just with one of my buddies, Jeff, and he was like, "Yo, you want to roll with me to grab some lunch with my buddy AJ?" I'm like, "AJ who?" And he's like, "AJ Roberts." I was like, "Hell yeah, I'm gonna go." So it was good to meet you out there, and like I said, it's good to have you on the line. So for anybody that might not know who you are, why don't you just kind of talk about your background, I guess different stuff that you do, and we'll just kind of take it away from there, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Travis said, my name is AJ Roberts, and I grew up in England and moved to the US when I was around when I was 16 years of age. I actually came over as a basketball player. I played basketball for like county region and made the England squad, and had trained for them, trained with them, and decided logically if I ever wanted to be a professional basketball player, then I had to come to the States. Unfortunately, I was 170 pounds, so I was just a little guy, point guard, and came over to the U.S. and 1 year of high school, my junior year. Unfortunately, senior year, I wasn't allowed to participate in sports because I guess they have a rule over here in Oregon where international students can only play 1 year. So during that time, I had to pick something else to do, and being in a small school, I got to participate. Played football. I was on the track team, so I was doing other sports and was lifting weights for that. And then when I couldn't play my senior year, I was competitive, so I had to compete in something. And so one of the ladies in town had said about competing in powerlifting, and I'd never heard of powerlifting before. I'd seen strongmen on TV. I knew what bodybuilding was. I'd seen the magazines. And I never heard of powerlifting, and so I went to my first powerlifting competition. I did deadlift only, and I actually pulled, I think something like 500 pounds, and it was the biggest deadlift of the contest. And so I was hooked right away, and from that moment on, I just basically pursued strength and got into the powerlifting. And so fast forward 11 years, many ups and downs, moves around the world. I ended up in Columbus, Ohio, training at Westside-Barbell under the tutelage of Louis Simmons, who, for those that don't know, is probably the greatest strength coach that's alive today. And using the conjugate system, in 3 years, Louis took me from a top 10 lifter to a world record holder, and I broke the world record with a 28. I broke it totaling 28.25. The record previously was 27.99, held by Jonas Rattle in Finland. I broke that. I held on to that for close to a year, bumped it up to 28.55, and then Jonas eventually took it back. And I believe Dave Hoff has it now, 29 something. So it went up. But anyway, I broke that in 2011. 2011. And then 2012, March 2012, my last goal that I wanted to hit was a 1,200 pound squat. And in March 2012, I squatted 1,205 pounds in competition and decided to retire from the sport. So I finished with best lifts of 1,205 pound squat, 910 pound bench press, and 15 pound deadlift. And I'll let the listeners know, for those who don't know, that's equipped lifting. So we use squat suits, bench press shirts, knee wraps, belt, all of that stuff. But the truth of the matter was, for me, I had pushed the boundaries as far as I could physically push them. My body was beginning to fall apart. I was beginning to have health conditions. and really got to a point where I was kind of scared for my health and where I was. And having a health background, I have a degree in sports science and, study this stuff religiously, as I'm sure you do, Travis. It got to a point where I couldn't ignore, what was going on anymore, and I had to make that switch. And so that's when I retired in 2012. And during my time at Westside, we had been introduced to CrossFit, and CrossFit community had came out to Westside, many coaches and athletes, and we actually partnered with CrossFit and started the CrossFit powerlifting seminar. Powerlifting trainer course is what it's called now. And so I was around the CrossFit industry, and of course, I've been around the personal training industry for a long time. I used to work with the fitness consulting group, and so I've worked with personal trainers up and down. So, I'm very passionate about the industry, passionate about personal trainers. And so when the CrossFit community came in, I was really attracted to the sport of CrossFit, the competition side. And so, when I retired, I was just kind of milling around in the gym for a few months, didn't really know what to do. And I actually decided, I moved from Columbus, Ohio to San Diego, California, because, who wouldn't want to live here? It's absolutely beautiful. And while here, started hanging out with the owners of CrossFit, and kind of they started saying to me, what are you doing? And I was saying, I'm just working out, trying to lose some weight. And they kind of told me that I should try CrossFit, and give it a shot. And I thought, what? Why not? Why not jump into it? And I really fell in love with it. I really loved the coaches and the community, and working with them, teaching them the powerlifting seminar, because they were so passionate. But now I fell in love with the actual sport itself. And I refer to it as the MMA of fitness. It involves gymnastics and powerlifting and strongman and calisthenic bodyweight stuff and all of the different components that, typically we're segmented into one, right? Most of us are into one, and I was a powerlifter. And now I was getting to play with the Olympic lifts and the strongman stuff, and I was getting to do all the different stuff. And so I really fell in love with CrossFit as a sport. But being the extremist that I am, I decided that if I was going to work out and do CrossFit, then I was going to compete in CrossFit. If I was going to compete in CrossFit, then I was going to have to train to win CrossFit, side effect of that, I lost, 75 pounds and got my health in check, and that was all great. But because of the extremist I am and the level I was pushing it at, again, my body started to fall apart, and I started suffering injuries and stuff. And so I managed to compete in the Open this year, 2013, and finish. My goal was to finish top 50%. And that sounds good, but you got to bear in mind there's over 100,000 people that entered. So my goal was to finish top 50%. I finished top 20%, but through the Open, my body really started breaking down because of the intensity of it. And I had to take a step back and realize that, although I'm still pretty young, I'm only 28 years old, what I've put my body through for the powerlifting and what I've done, it has left me with a lot of aches and pains and issues that, most people don't have if they haven't pushed it to that level. So, I've kind of taken a step back, and I'm just right now still working on, getting in a little bit of shape, working on putting some muscle mass back on my frame because I got a little bit too small for my liking. I'm one of those guys. I like to look big and be big. And so, I took a step back from the CrossFit and still incorporate a lot of what I learned from that into my training. But really right now, I would say, if anything, if I had to classify it on bodybuilding, because the strength side of it, I'm never going to be as strong as I was unless I go back to doing what I was doing and where I was, training at Westside and the weight I was. I'm obviously never going to be as athletic as I was as a kid, because of the way my body is. So right now, I'm just kind of enjoying really training, enjoying the process, and I'm still blessed to be teaching the CrossFit powerlifting certification, traveling the world doing that, get to go to Europe later this year, England and Italy and places like that. But through that, it's really changed my perception of what strength is, and hopefully we can dive into that. But yeah, I've really been open my eyes to what pose the question, what is strong really,
Mm-hmm.
And these experiences have really opened my eyes, and I'm blessed to have had them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story of, how you got into the game, and I guess the journey that you've taken, all the ups and downs with it. I think that's something that not a lot of people think about. I mean, they see that you have these records or you've achieved these records, but then what they might not think about is what it took to get there. It's not a straight line ever. So, but
Exactly.
what I want to dig into is kind of go back into the past when you first went into Westside. That's a gym that I've always wanted to go into. Just kind of talk about your first experiences in Westside. How was it? I'm just interested to hear.
Yeah, so Westside is kind of this, it's a warehouse gym. And the thing with Westside that's so intimidating to people is what would be considered the strongest guy in most gyms is the weakest guy at Westside. So when I started training at Westside, I had already squatted 1,008 pounds. I was an elite lifter, top 10 in the world, sponsored and stuff like that. It wasn't like I was, a bad lifter at all. But I went in, and my squat was one of the lowest squats in the gym, And so the good thing for me is I trained with a world record holder early in my career, Brent Mikesell. And I learned pretty soon that these guys are no different than anyone else, right? They might have bigger numbers and this and that, but they go through the same struggles, and we're all part of this together. And I think a lot of that is probably because powerlifting never became a mainstream sport. So amateurs and pros compete on the same platform. It's a very open interaction. It's easy to get information. Everyone gives back, shares what they learn. And so when I went into Westside, at first it was you're slightly intimidated, Louis is Lou, and the guy is intimidating in and of itself. And the gym, of course, you go in and I was a big guy, 300 pounds. You go in and you're a little guy, you're the little guy. And the first thing in my mind was, man, I'm going to really have to step up to be here. And the beauty of it, though, is that the gym is all about getting stronger. So that's all that matters in there. It doesn't matter about your personal life, doesn't matter about your work life, doesn't matter about anything else. It's all about getting stronger. And so if, that is your goal, then that is the place you have to be, right? If your goal is to be the strongest you ever want to be, that is the place you have to be. For me, what was fascinating with Westside is I'd read the books, I'd watched the DVDs, I had talked to Louis on the phone, because he's a very accessible guy. Anyone who wants to talk to him could write him an email or leave a phone message, and he'll call you back or he'll write you back. He is very, very open. He loves sharing information. If people want to stop by the gym, they can call up and stop by the gym. There's no drop-in fee or anything like that. He just asks that you let him know in advance, and you come to work out. You don't come to just watch, right? And so I go in thinking, I know what Westside is. I know what Westside's all about. And I get there and I realize, holy crap, I don't know anything, And the intensity these guys worked out at, and the seriousness and the focus, these were things I'd never seen before because I'd only ever trained with one or two people. So there was a level, but when you've got a group that are all focused and all pushing, and these are your teammates, but they're also the people that are going to beat you one day. So you want the best for them, but you're also pushing yourself as hard as you can to stay ahead of them, right? That combination is just so powerful. And then for me, it was being able to train alongside people who've already done what I want to do. It made it so much easier. I didn't have to. It took all the guesswork out of it. So at first it was a little intimidating, but then you realize this is a place that literally breeds champions. And for anyone who's read the book, The Talent Code, if you haven't read the book and you're interested in success and championship producing, how to produce champions, that's a great book to read. The Talent Code. It dives into this whole concept of why places breed champions, and Westside is a place that breeds champions. And so it's hard to say one thing about it. Because of how fascinating a place it is and how I want to say magical, but you'll find out pretty fast. There's no real secrets, the real secret is the hard work, it's the level of commitment and the hard work. That's the real secret. But Westside itself, it's very intimidating, but anyone who goes there walks away and it is like a complete quantum shift in thinking, and you'll go away better for it every single time. And I'm not there anymore. I've been gone, like I said, since April 2012 is when I officially moved away. But of course, being involved teaching the seminars. I still talk to Louis and that, and I'm still learning stuff from the guy. I broke the records. I'm teaching this stuff, and we'll talk about something, and he just puts things in a different light. And of course, when you have a laboratory of people you can test, and he's got the best in the world, and he's making them better. That's how you know the guy is on top of his stuff. And you hear the same comments about guys like Charles Poliquin and these other leading experts about how they're ahead of their time. And I truly believe it. I truly believe these guys and their thinking is so far ahead. But what makes it so powerful is they have a laboratory and they're testing this stuff. And I still learn stuff all the time, and it's just a fascinating place. And I think that, I think every coach owes it to themselves to at least go there. Even if you don't follow the conjugate system, I think what people start to realize, though, when they do go there, is that it's not about powerlifting. Westside is a powerlifting gym, and so, what you see is people benching and squatting and deadlift. But we have MMA fighters that train there, NFL players that come and train there. We have swimming athletes, running athletes. We had a pole vaulter training there. And these guys follow the same training principles as us, but they don't do the same exercises. They're not training to be powerlifters, they're training to be athletes. And so I think that when people go there, if they don't know much, they start to see that, and they start to see how they can apply pieces or take the system and use it in their own training. And it's a fascinating place, and I like going visiting still, and it's still one of those places where you'll never see that kind of stuff going on anywhere else. It's just truly one of a kind.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the main points that I think I need to drive home with people watching this is the fact that you need to surround yourself with people that are a whole lot stronger than you, and you should be intimidated when you go in to train, because I get the question all the time from people. They're asking how to get stronger, and just in that sense, if you were to surround yourself with stronger people, and you're not always the strongest badass around, that alone will just change things around, because it's going to push you a lot harder. So for people that don't, necessarily have access to like Westside, I mean, that's the next best thing to look for, is just look for a gym where there's people that are stronger than you. What were you going to say?
The worst thing to be is the best.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. Because getting to that world record, for me, so when I broke that world record, I didn't have to have the biggest squat, the biggest bench, or biggest deadlift. Now, I had to have the biggest combined. But individually, to break the record, I didn't have to break any individual world records to take my total world record. Okay? But once you've broken the total world record, you have no one else to learn from.
Yeah.
You are the top of the chain, right? And so I had to still find, it was like when I had one of the biggest squats in the gym. Currently, like, people who had squatted more had left, so I wasn't able to learn from them. So what did I do? I reached out to Donnie Thompson, who, first man ever total 3,000. How are you training your squat? He broke the world squat record. What's going on? What are you doing? He applies the conjugate principles. He just has his own spin on it. But you have to go find the people who've already done it. And so if we back up and we look at this in a couple of different lights, if you were a CrossFit athlete and you wanted to go to the regionals, you better be training with someone who's already gone to regionals, or like have access to that person so you can learn from them and say, okay, how many times a day do you train? What's your diet like? What's your life like? Because modeling is the quickest way to success. And I think that if you want to be a bikini competitor, or if you want to be a bodybuilder, you gotta go find someone who's already done what you want to do, And it's not because you can't learn the stuff yourself, but it's because with everything there's a learning curve, and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fail, and that's still going to happen, but it happens a lot less when you follow someone that's already gone through it, because you can kind of leverage. They say it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert. Well, you can leverage that. If someone's already an expert, you can save yourself 10,000 hours and just start at their point. And that's what I always tell people. Look, if you want to learn something, find the person who's doing it and learn from them, and then start experimenting on your own. Too many people go back and read books from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and they learn the science of it, and then they want to start from that point. Well, there's people out there who have been applying this stuff for 20 years, and if you want to learn about fat loss, I always tell people, go to Alan Cosgrove, because he's took all that science and he's applied it, and now he's at a different point. start where he's at. You're ahead of the game. You're gonna change. You're not gonna ever do the same as someone else. You're gonna find your own path and your own journey. But don't waste, you know, don't go back and say I gotta get 10,000 of my own hours. Leverage someone else's and then build upon that. And no matter what you want to do, whether it's weight loss, whatever, be in an environment that's breeding that. So, you know, I know with a lot of your clients, you know, if the goal is to lose weight, you know, you're not putting them alongside a bodybuilder, right? You put them into a specific weight loss program. And that's where people, I think, individuals who train maybe on themselves or something like that, they need to understand that training partners and teams and groups and things like that, we don't do this stuff because it, you know, you got to have a training partner because you need a spot. You need a training partner because it pushes you. You know, if they're stronger over here, it pushes you, but it shows you that path. And, you know, we look back at that 4-minute mile, you know, before someone broke the 4-minute mile, no one had broke the 4-minute mile. And then it gets broken, and now if you don't run a 4-minute mile, you're not even considered a good runner, right? So once the perception's been broke, it's easy. What's the easiest way to break your reality? Is go find the person that's already broken it. You know, the hardest thing to do is if you're number one, then you're in trouble because no one's ahead of you. It's hard to learn, you know, and that's where it gets tough. But when you're chasing, you know, you can shortcut your process so fast by finding those people who are either stronger than you, faster than you, more in shape than you, you know, whatever it is, even if it was outside successful than you. These are the people you surround yourself with, and you'll quickly raise your game, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and another important point along with what you're mentioning is, you know, the importance of a coach. You know, a lot of people think they're too good for a coach. I know that you do a lot of coaching. I do a lot of coaching, you know, with people online, people that can't come into my gym or whatever, and I think that's a huge, you know, component to more success is getting a coach. If you don't have access to, like, you know, people that you can surround yourself with, you know, definitely find yourself a coach. I got myself a coach for training. I don't know if you have yourself a coach. I know you got a coach for, you know, your business and stuff like that, but, you know.
No, I got a nutrition coach. I have a training partner that's more experienced than me in bodybuilding. I say, you know, I'm just kind of working out like now, but my training partner is more experienced. He's a competitive bodybuilder, so I'm learning stuff there that I've never learned before about shaping the body, you know, because I've never dove into that world. So now I'm learning more about that. So yeah, I have coaches in these areas. I have coaches in business, in relationships, and the reason you need a coach is, and this is for anyone, even if you are a coach yourself, the hardest thing to do is assess yourself and see it from that bird's eye view. Yeah. You know, helping other people is a lot easier than helping yourself. And so, because you don't see what other people see, and sometimes when you're so into something, so involved, that whether that be your training or that be, you know, like you say, business or whatever, it's hard to step back and have that bird's eye view. And so a coach, a lot of the times, they're going to be able to see what you can't see, you know, point you in the right direction, and then they're going to be there for when you screw up. And you do screw up no matter what. You always screw up because that's what we do, and we make mistakes and we fail and things don't work. You know, we were talking just before the call. You know, I injured my pec. I tore a slight tear in my pec last week on Thursday. That was me being an idiot. That wasn't on my program. I wasn't supposed to do that. That was me being an idiot. I'm going and seeking out the people who have gone through this before to learn how to rehab it the quickest way, you know? Because I have my ideas, but I want to know from that person that's already done it. And so I think too many people think that a coach it reflects on them bad and say, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And that's not the case at all. The greatest leaders in the world have peers and mentors that they can lean on in those things. That's why businesses have board of advisors. You know, that's why Richard Branson has the group, the Elders, where it's all these thought leaders from around the world. It's because every single person needs someone to help them and guide them because, you know, sometimes it's hard to look at what you're doing. And I think what you said is absolutely right. You know, having a coach is one of the best things you can do.
Definitely, man. Yeah, it's important. I mean, it just goes all back to, you know, the success that you've had. Obviously, you know, goes back to when you were in Westside and all the support and, you know, guidance that you got there. So, but as far as like you mentioned mentioned strength within the main lifts, so like deadlift, squat, bench. And I think when people tend to think about those three lifts, they automatically think powerlifting. And something that you mentioned was with Westside, especially when people look at Westside, the gym, they think just powerlifting. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of other athletes in there. There's track athletes I know that have been in there, football players, MMA. And so that kind of drives home the point on how important strength really is, and for any sport out there. So what I wanted to just dig into is just the three main lifts. Starting with the deadlifts. Just kind of talk about some of the main mistakes that you see most people make, even elite athletes. Because I mean, you were there in Westside, training with those top athletes in the world. With these main lifts, what were the main mistakes that you're seeing people make with the deadlift? We'll just start with the deadlift.
Yeah, and this actually applies to all the three lifts, but I'm specific to deadlift. So the biggest mistakes that people make, and the thing is, as a beginner, you get away with it. So oftentimes, when we start something, if we have success, it's hard for us to realize that's not going to work forever, right? It's like, well, it worked back then, so why doesn't it work now? Yeah. The biggest mistake I see is people doing the deadlift too often, okay? And they think to be a good deadlifter, you have to deadlift all the time. And, yeah, I know lots of people have their own opinions, but in my experience, both in the gym, both as a coach, both of what I've seen, is that we have to train our weaknesses, okay? So in the deadlift, our weaknesses are always going to be our lower back. It's going to be our glutes and hamstrings for our lockout strength. And so we have to train that. And so we use bands and accommodating resistance to increase that weight. As you lift it, it gets heavier, so you can generate the force and then have to squeeze through and lock out. We use future method, which is using bands wrapped around the bar to make it lighter at the top. So we go both ways with that. So there's lots of tricks and things you can do. But the truth is that you can't train the deadlift by doing a regular deadlift all the time. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to train, most people know the conventional deadlift, but we have the sumo deadlift as well, where your legs are on the outside, more in a wide stance. And then we have ultra wide, where we actually take collars and put them on the end of the bar to make the bar longer so we can get our feet even wider. And we do these different deadlift positions because they train the muscles differently. They train the supporting muscles differently. They train the main movers differently. And what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that we don't have any weak links in the chain, and that old saying, you're only as strong as the weakest link, that's the truth, and people think of strength in numbers, and strength is measured in time under tension, and strength is measured in percentages, okay? So if your deadlift is stuck at, say, 500 pounds, okay, because you can't lock it out, but you can grip it. So it's not your grip strength, but you can't lock it out. So it's going to be a low back glute issue. It could be a positioning issue. So first we got to make sure that your glutes are firing. So we always go, make sure that the muscle's working. And if it's working, we're great. Then it's just weak. So all we have to do is raise the strength of your glutes a certain percentage, and your deadlift will go up a whole bunch. Because maybe you're generating enough force to deadlift 550, but at that transition point where it goes from the hamstrings and it ends up in the glutes, you're not able to lock it out because they're not strong enough. Now, if we get the glutes a percentage stronger, now we can lift more. We didn't get 50 pounds stronger, we just strengthened that weak link. And so that's the biggest mistake I see in the deadlift. You have to train variations. You can't train the deadlift all the time. You have to train variations. You have to change the load. You have to change the time under tension. You have to mix it up, because if you think about it, if you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same results, Yep. And if you keep doing the same thing over and again and expect different results, then you got no one to blame but yourself. So what we found, and the principles I applied, and it's basically is that variation. You got to have the variation. So you have to train, like I said, different heights, deadlifting from different heights, whether it's an extended range of motion or a shortened range of motion. We utilize accommodating resistance to make the weight heavier or lighter at the top. So there's all these things, but that's the biggest thing I think is people have one way of doing something, so they have one stance, and they deadlift from the floor to lockout every single time, and that's the biggest mistake I see with a deadlift.
Now, in regards to variation, how often are you wanting to switch up your variation? So say we're looking at week 1 we're doing ultra wide sumo deadlift. Would you stay on that for a couple weeks? Would you do that multiple times a week? I guess what would you be doing for that?
Yeah. So the way our training is we have a maximal effort day for lower body and upper body, and then we have a dynamic day, which is for upper body and lower body. So if for technique work, we use submaximal weights. We work it on dynamic day. So that's different because we're working, for us, we work that squat and that deadlift, okay? For an Olympic lifter, they're going to work their Olympic lifts. But it's with submaximal weight, so we're able to repeat the effort, and we're working on explosive power. But if we're trying to gain strength and we're working on maximal weight, so we're going as heavy as we possibly can go, we rotate weekly. You can get away with 3 weeks, but then you're going to start to go backwards. What we found is if you rotate weekly, then you never hit that stagnation. The thing that I hear often, the argument I hear against that is that how do you perfect technique if you're changing weekly? And here's the honest truth. Every lift you do should have exactly the same technique. Every deadlift you do should have exactly the same technique. So if you're doing a conventional deadlift from the floor, it should look the same as a conventional deadlift off of blocks. The only difference is that range of motion, but your body position is exactly the same. So if you have bad technique, you have to fix the technique first. We can't just load you all the time. And I think that's where people get screwed up. And I hear this in the squat all the time. People say my box squat's different than my free squat. Well, something's wrong there because it should be exactly the same. And your front squat, your overhead squat, and your back squat, the bottom position should all look exactly the same. If it doesn't, it's because of our own individual issues. Mobility issues, flexibility issues, weakness issues, depending on muscle groups. And so there's only one way to do it. Everything else is a variation of that based on an individual's needs, right? And so the rotation of exercises shouldn't change much at all, just because you got your hands up overhead. Your lower body should be in the same position as it is for a front squat. Torso should be in the same position. Now, if it isn't, it's because of issues that are non-related to the way it should or shouldn't be. Yeah. So we rotate weekly on our maximal effort exercises, and that continues to get progress. We come back to the same exercise. The longer you can wait, the better. But we came back about every 6 weeks to that same exercise to test and make sure we are making progress. And what we found is over time, some exercises work for you, some exercises don't. So you kind of throw some out, keep some in. But with the team I train here, they don't come, but they only do the same exercise like once in a training cycle. So every 12 weeks they'll come back to that same exercise, and they hit personal records every time: 5, 10, 15, 20-pound personal records. And that's all that matters. Are you getting stronger? And if you're getting stronger, then your main lifts are going to go up as well. And I think that's the important thing. As long as you have good technique. If your technique's screwed up, then that's not going to apply because stuff will not carry over. Because if you bench one way on an incline bench, elbows out, let's say on the incline bench, and then you go flat bench and you bench elbows in, well, it's different. You should be using those same positions, working the same muscle groups and each things, and that's the difference between strength and bodybuilding. When we're lifting for strength, we're trying to utilize as much muscle as we can to move a weight every single time. So it doesn't matter what the lift is. It's a full body lift, deadlift, bench press, squat, it's a full body lift. Whereas if you're a bodybuilder, you're trying to isolate. So you're only trying to work one muscle group, right? Maybe it's your pecs, maybe it's your triceps. So you're trying to limit the muscle activation only to the specific muscle. And I think that's where people get mixed up. With strength, every lift should be a full body lift. When we go and do our accessory exercises to build our weaknesses, then we apply the principles of bodybuilding because we're trying to be specific. But for strength, we've got to utilize our entire body. And we're only going to do that if our entire body's strong. We don't want any weak links. We don't want anything like that. And, I've kind of, like I said, redefined my definition of strength. And now it's strength across broad domain. So I'm kind of borrowing the CrossFit lingo there. But strength across broad domain, meaning, if you can't put your hands up overhead in an overhead squat, then you're not strong, And so you should probably fix that and, and make sure that you can do that. If you can't get in the right position, you're not strong. And a lot of times it's limitations from mobility, but there's weakness issues too. If you can't do a pull-up, but you can deadlift 300 pounds, there's probably something wrong there. You have a huge imbalance, And so these are the things that you got to start looking at. And strength is, how can I be strong everywhere? You know, not just in the squat, but everywhere. So if I can squat up and down, great. But what's my lunge like? Because I guarantee if you find your weakness, that's what you got to work on. You build that up, and your overall strength is going to go through the roof. Because these are supporting muscle groups. These are muscles that are also firing in every exercise. But if they're weak, they're not contributing.
Very, very interesting, man. Now, in regards to, variation is key, obviously. Now,
Absolutely.
Would you do the same thing for, let's say, somebody that's, a beginner at this stuff? So would you keep them on, for example, with the variations? Would you have them, working the same deadlift for 3 weeks and then switching variations? Or would you have them switching up as often as, a super advanced athlete would be doing?
Yeah, the only difference for me between a beginner and obviously the advanced athlete is there may be a phase where we're not touching a barbell with them because we have to build some baseline strength, right? Yep. So we may be dragging sleds, we may be doing body weight work and all things like that. Because, if you can't do a body weight squat, with good technique, there's no point loading that person. And it doesn't really matter what their age is. There's an issue. We got to fix that. We got to get that right. Once we've got foundational strength down, to me, the conjugate system can be applied exactly as it is because it's based off of mathematics and science. So the percentages we use on our speed day, on our dynamic day for the squat, is 75, 80, 85%. If it's just straight weight, okay, accommodating resistance, it changes. But if it's just straight weight, we're using those percentages, 12 sets of 2. That doesn't matter what your squat is, that can be applied because it's percentage based, it's mathematics. So a 100-pound squatter can train right alongside a 500-pound squatter, okay? The difference is going to come in the accessory exercises. So with my beginners, I may do some more compound accessory exercises because if we're just weak, we need to train everything, right? So I can't be over there doing a hamstring leg curl, with a beginner. We're probably going to have them doing an RDL or something like that because it's more compound, it will activate more muscles. So that's the only difference. In terms of the main template, though, the template remains the same. Now, the exercise selection is going to be a slightly different, but the template for me is always the same. And I'm a big fan of starting someone on something they can do for the rest of their life. I don't see this need. I always tell people, there's no program out there that doesn't work. It all works, but a lot of them don't work forever. They stop. They work for a very short period of time, and then they don't work anymore, right? The conjugate system, because it's not a system of exercises prescribed. Here's a 12-week program. It's a concept. It's a theory. It can be applied to beginner, to intermediate, to advanced. What changes is your exercise selection and things like that. But in terms of the core concept, no, I would have my beginners max out twice a week, and I'd have them do dynamic work twice a week. The difference would be in accessory exercises, obviously, because we have to keep building that foundational strength up. And Louis always says, the peak of a pyramid is only as big as the base. So we got to make sure we have that base down. And so we're going to be dragging sleds, and we're going to be doing repetition work as accessory stuff, and we're doing all of that stuff. But the concept of max strength, maximal strength comes with maximal effort, and explosive strength comes with explosive effort. And so we're still going to be doing those. And the formula, we may have slightly different ingredients in that, but yeah, I would rotate them weekly because they need to build all their muscle groups in different areas. And the body, you beat the body up, the body doesn't know how it got beat up, it just knows it got beat up, right? So by changing the angles, changing the range of motion, changing the bars, changing the resistance, you don't have to change a lot. I think that's the biggest misconception. We have all these specialty bars at Westside. To change the load, the spinal load. So we change the bar, it changes where that load is on the spine. So we're building, strength. But you don't have to do that. You just have to change something, So if you do, let's say, if you do a regular deadlift week 1, week 2, you could do deadlift standing on a plate. So, we've just changed the range of motion, but that's a big enough of a change to avoid, the adaptation, to avoid the stagnation, avoid us getting stuck. Okay, and hitting that, we've all gone through that where we've plateaued and we're stuck for a while and we're trying to figure out how to get out of it. All we have to do is change something ever so slightly for it to make a difference. And I think people get too caught up in bands and chains and bars and all this different stuff. You can keep it simple. You could use a regular bar And, if like I said, deadlift, we can go from the floor to standing on a plate to pulling off of out of the rack or blocks if you're in an Olympic gym. And then on bench, we can go from flat bench to an incline bench to a closed grip bench, because you got the different grips you can use. So we can change our foot stance. And there's so many things we can change, and we can keep it so simple that, for a beginner, that's what we would probably keep it a lot simpler, because they don't need to throw in all that stuff. Can they? Absolutely, but they don't need to. So we try to keep it simple so that the learning curve isn't huge. Moving your feet from a closed stance to a medium stance isn't going to change much, but it's enough. Yep. To cause a new stimulus.
I like that point that you make, because a lot of people what they tend to think about with the conjugate method is, and people just get caught up in this stuff in general just because it's the cool stuff to do. But like when it comes to chains and bands and all these different bars and different variations of lifts you can do, they get caught up in that stuff and they think that you need all that, whereas you don't necessarily need that stuff. Just as you mentioned. It's just about switching up the variation. You can use the same bar, but it's just switching up the variation, switching up the range of motion, which is key, So,
absolutely. And the truth is, so we do 1 rep max for maximal effort day, okay? And the reason we do that is, from Louis' experience, 1 rep max has the lowest risk of injury, okay? You get into 3s, you get into 5s, 8s, 10, 12s, the injury risk increases. And that's because, as you know, as we do repetitions, our technique gets a little bit worse, and we start to do bad repetitions, okay? And we can still rep it out, but we may not have the right technique. But the truth is, it's not that you can't do that, and lots of people on maximal effort day do an 8 rep max, okay? Maximal effort is a maximal effort. So if you work up to an 8 rep max, it's not repetition. Repetition is repeated effort. Sub-maximal weights, repeated. So 3 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5. That's repeated effort. Maximal effort is working up as heavy as you can for 1 set. Okay? Whether it be a 1 rep max, 3 rep max, 5 rep max. So you can change your repetitions if that floats your boat. We don't do that because we found in our experience, and maybe it is with just advanced athletes. You got to understand, Westside, mostly athletes are advanced athletes. We found the injury risk was high. That's why we do 1 rep max. People always ask me that question. Well, what about 3s and 5s? I don't have anything against it, but we start to move that risk ratio goes up, so risk to benefit. But that's the key. For people to get over with the conjugate system. This stuff was around. Louis' stuff was around before they had bands and chains and stuff. And then chains came along, and they started using it and got a great result. Then bands came along, they started using that, they got an even better result. Okay, so that's why we use accommodating resistance. I mean, go into the science of it all, but in the basis of the basic truth is, when these tools came along, they started using them and they got results faster than ever before. So that's why we use them. So we can do math without a calculator, but if we want to do it fast, we use a calculator. So you can get strong without any of these tools. But these tools speed that up, and that's how I look at it. It's not I can't apply it, I can't do this. It's these tools are just tools to speed up the process. And is it easier if you have all the bars to train the squat? Yes, because you don't have to think about changing much. You just change the bar. Boom! I'm still squatting, but now the bar's putting that load in a different position without me having to think of high bar, low bar, overhead squat, front squat. Like I can keep that load on my back. Safety squat bar makes it feel like a front squat. Camber bar, the weights are swinging. It feels like a yoke. Like all these different things. And so I think that's the hardest thing. And a lot of it is obviously because the information gets put out there. Louis has always written for Powerlifting USA, so his articles are based towards powerlifters. Now his articles appear in Flex magazine. And so he's still kind of writing to powerlifters, but he's starting to bridge that gap. But he's presented for the National Throwers Convention, NSC, all these different places. But you have to understand his whole experience is with powerlifters. You've got to break the system down, and if you ever talk to him, he does it himself. But you've got to think beyond the walls of the 3 lifts, squat, bench, and deadlift. Yeah. The system comes from Olympic lifting. It's based off of Olympic lifting principles. So it can be applied there, and lots of people are doing that. Rudy at Outlaw is applying it to the Olympic lifts. He calls it limited conjugate. And like I said, we have MMA fighters and stuff like that. So it's not about the exercises. It's not about the bands and chains. It's about the concept of getting strong using those 3 things: maximal effort, dynamic effort, and repetition effort. You use those 3 things in your training, you're going to go up.
Good stuff, man. And you know what I wanna dig into a little bit is, you know, how you made the transition into CrossFit when you decided to do that. So with your mindset, and I remember talking to you in San Diego, and you mentioned this at the start, is that was just the way you thought about it. You're going from powerlifting to something that you were the best at. Now you're switching gears to another sport, which was CrossFit. You wanted to be the best at it. So I guess how did you change your training up? Because obviously you were gonna, and you being a powerlifter, you're obviously gonna have a strength bias
Absolutely.
in terms of how you train. So I guess what type of programming were you doing to get prepared for CrossFit? How did you switch it up mainly?
Yeah. So at first, my first thing to do was go find a place that was knew what they were doing. Okay, so I started training with some guys who were pretty switched on, and I just turned all my training over to them because I didn't want to have to think about it. And so it was very Olympic lifting heavy base because obviously that's a huge part of CrossFit. I had no background in that, so that was a huge part of my training. And so we were doing a lot of Olympic lifts. In terms of the power lifts and that strength, I came to the thought process of my strength is way beyond where it needs to be. Okay, so I thought to myself, okay, well I want to say the word neglect because I think that's really what I can neglect this in order to train to work on these other areas that are so low, which my cardiovascular, basically my fitness level, and my mobility and my Olympic lifts, all of those things needed to work on. So I was I worked with Kelly Starrett. I was on a really strict mobility plan, a couple of hours a day. I worked with these guys. We did all the Olympic lift stuff. And then I would do 1 or 2 WODs depending on the length of the WOD, but I was doing multiple WODs, doing Tabatas, basically to bring the body weight down. And so I was training, 2 hours in the gym and then another hour or so with mobility and all this different stuff. And that was early. And then as I started, as I got in shape and things started to change, obviously my needs started to change because I became good enough at this and good enough at that. And so then I focused on the skill work. What exercises do I need to master? The muscle up. Bar muscle up, handstand push-ups, all these different exercises. And so then in a lot of that work, now I was in shape, I had the strength already, I had the flexibility now it was to master that skill work, the gymnastic side of stuff, and the exercises that are, pretty tough to do when you're 290, when I first got into it. So as I lost the weight, I then started to do those exercises. And then going into the, I guess, in season, going into the open, I went back to that conjugate system, and just started rotating through. So I would do the strength work first, I'd work on my strength work. And I would break the Olympic lifts down. And so the Olympic lifts were kind of added in. And so overhead pressing obviously becomes an important aspect. So that gets thrown in on upper body days, lower body days, overhead squat, front squat. Those exercises have to be thrown in as well. And so that's what I did. So I would do the max effort or dynamic work with those kind of exercises. Then I would do 1 or 2 exercises and for my weaknesses, and so assistant exercises, or even better word for it is corrective exercises. So it's basically fixing those things that were weak, because as I gain range of motion overhead, you start to find out, like, oh, my shoulders aren't that strong, my rotators aren't that strong, and I've only ever bench press up and down. Now I'm going up overhead. It's a whole different. So now I have new supporting muscles I have to get stronger. So I would focus on those, and then we'd go and we would do the WOD. So I would do that, and then on my off days, I never really had off days. I took this from Invictus. They have what they call recovery WODs, where you go and you row, you swim, or you bike, or you just get out and move, basically. And so I started applying that, and that's how I was training, and so I took the concepts, but you have to mix it up and change it. But I look at CrossFit as a sport. So a WOD is the game, right? And so in your training, if you're an MMA fighter, let's say you would train in the gym in the morning, you do some skill work, and then maybe a couple of times a week you spar. Okay, but you never go. When you spar, it's not like you go 100%. You do that every now and again, but it's not like every day you're 100% getting beat up, right? And so I had to apply the same principles to CrossFit. So, the WODs, it was a lot of times learning how to pace myself, not going, like knowing when to be 100%, when to be 80%, be kind of, to go through the WOD. And so that I was always able to get back in the gym and be performing. And so those were the things I had to figure out. But I looked at it as the same as a sport, If the WOD was the game, then I got to train for the game, And that's how I looked at it. And so a lot of times when the WOD came around, I would pace or I'd break stuff. I'd practice breathing patterns. I'd practice repetitions like, toes to bar. Is it better to go, if I have 20 reps, do 5 rest, 5 rest, 5 rest, or should I just try full 20? So those are the things that I implemented. And so I took the same concepts as if you think about the maximal effort day. It's like heavy, low repetition, short, and I'd apply those to the WOD. So my WOD, that's how I was varying my conditioning, I guess, for those who maybe not CrossFitters or something. But I was taking the principles of maximal effort day and applying that into that workout. I was taking the principles of dynamic day and applying those into the workout. So I was having short WODs versus long WODs, chippers and all these different things. And it's a lot of fun like that. And you just have to be careful to make sure your recovery is on point with your diet and things like that in order to be able to perform. And the thing is that if you look at how the Bulgarians used to train, I mean, they max out 6 times a day, okay? And they would max out 2 lifts in the morning, 2 lifts midday, and then 2 lifts in the evening. The problem was the majority of people cannot do that. But CrossFit is starting to pull out a lot of people who can do that, who can train 6 times a day. So if you're a super athlete, you're going to be in the gym 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. And there's programs that do that. But for the majority of people, for most of the people who are doing this, you're not going to be able to do that, You've only got an hour, so you've got to break that hour up. If you've got more time, great. But and that's kind of where I was at was, trying to push it to multiple times a day, but my body just can't handle that. And so this is the system I came up with. And it's really no different than Westside, apart from the exercises and then, of course, then the conditioning work. But, our football players would come in and work with us, and then they'd go do their conditioning work at night. So it was just a case of me looking at the sport, how we trained our athletes, and being like, okay, well, instead of me going and running 5, 10, 5s and 100-yard sprints, I'm doing the WOD. The WOD became the sport. And so that's how I look at it, and it works really well. And people, that's what I'm teaching people, coaching people on, and they're having great success. So it's just combining those elements, and looking at it from a performance aspect, and looking at it, because if we just take the WOD, and someone just WODs, it's a great conditioning fat loss program, But for strength, you have to train for strength. Yeah. Just like Olympic lifts, if you want to have Olympic lifts are very technical lifts, right? So we've got to be able to overhead squat with perfect technique to be able to do a perfect snatch. So, we have to master those individual lifts. So that's skill work and things like that. And so, when you put it all together, really, if you just have a base program, and start tweaking it from there, you can figure out what you need versus someone else. And, it's fun, and it doesn't take too much time, So just, it's to simplify it, basically strength work first, couple of assistant exercises, and then the WOD. And it works great.
Yeah, and I think for people that are getting into that sport, and a lot of gyms and a lot of coaches actually still make this mistake where they're neglecting that consistent strength work, and they're skipping to the games without practicing. Basically, the way you put it, I thought that was pretty interesting how you put it that way, because it is a sport, so the WODs are like the actual game, the competition, but you got to practice for that. And I think one of the biggest things is the stronger you get in these main lifts. So, for example, like we go back to, talking about the squat. So your squats should all look the same. Your front squat, your back squat, overhead squat, bottom position should look the same. If you get stronger in that lift, obviously that's going to cross over into, your games, your WODs. So you have higher rep sets of, lower amounts of weights. If you get stronger, more efficient in that lift, in that particular lift, it's going to cross over. But most people are neglecting that part of their training that want to be competitive in the sport of CrossFit, they're skipping over, the main strength work, which is a problem, so.
Yeah, and I think that people forget relative strength is the key here. So strength gains without sacrifice of anything else. For a sport like, well, for any sport, really, it's strength gains without sacrificing anything else. So if you think of it, once we're in the best shape we can physically be in, what else can we do? I mean, there is only so much of being in shape you can be, right? You can only be so in shape. So then that next component is the strength. And then the strength endurance and things like that. And it's relative. So, if we get stronger, as long as nothing else changes, then we should be better. Because as our maximal strength increases, our effort per repetition on an RX-based workout our effort is less because of our maximal strength is greater. And so, I saw this really with the 225 combine test. We'd have these NFL, prospects coming in, and we wouldn't do any rep work with them. We would just raise their maximal strength on the bench press, go back to the 225 bench press, and their number would go up.
Yeah.
Why? Because we know the body can exert 100% for about 45 to 50 seconds, full out sprint, So how do we get more repetitions in that time frame? Well, we have to move the weight quicker. How do we move the weight quicker? We make the weight lighter. How do we make it lighter? We make maximal strength higher. So that was the key. And you hear long distance runners all the time saying, "Oh, I don't run long distance." They work on improving their sprint strength. They work on improving their maximal strength. Then they go run their long distance because every step is less effort, less effort, less effort. Mm-hmm. And that's the key. And so if we can raise our maximal strength, everything else is going to get easier. And consistency, like you mentioned, is so important because people think the strength will carry over. They can do a little strength phase and it'll carry over. Now, strength will carry over for maybe 2 weeks maximal strength. Then it starts to decrease. By that 4th, 5th, 6th week, we're way away from where we were because the body has forgotten how to recruit the muscles, the motor pattern, all of that different stuff. And so we have to retrain the body to get that strength back. And so that's why the consistency and strength, constantly pushing it with a system that allows you to do that. So you're not, with the rotation and things like that, you're not overtraining, and we can always make progress. And I think you're seeing it now. I'm off to the CrossFit Games this week, but you're seeing it with these top guys. The top guys are still the top guys, but what's happening? Their maximal strength is going up. They're not getting any faster at their grace time because there's only so fast the human body can move. But their maximal strength on an overhead squat is going through the roof. So
yeah, I think that's an important concept right there, just an important point in regards to, like you mentioned earlier, the 4-minute mile. So when we first saw the 4-minute mile broke, there's more people that broke that 4-minute mile, whereas that's what you're starting to see more now with the athletes in CrossFit, especially the guys at the top. Some of the things that we weren't seeing before, high rep Olympic lifts with a certain amount of weight, you're starting to see that with the snatches and just Olympic lifts in general. I mean, it's getting insane. Some of these guys are becoming, they could compete in Olympic lifting if they wanted to.
Oh yeah, I mean, guys who could qualify. And why is that? It's because they're not training that traditional Olympic lifting. The American Olympic lifting. They're not training like that. They're training and they're raising themselves across broad domain. But you raise strength, and that affects every other area. Very rarely, and this is what people would say to me, coming into the CrossFit world. It was interesting to see how my strength carried over, and I cleaned 315 within a couple of months. I could do when I was my biggest. I did a 405 reverse curl, but I had no catch position. Obviously, I couldn't even bend my wrist backwards. But once I got technique, once I got everything down, perfect 315 clean. Well, that's not too shabby for a guy that's only been doing Olympic lifts for like 3 months,
No.
And so if you think about it, like technique is very important in Olympic lifting. But once you have technique down, who's going to win? The stronger guy every time. Exactly. So you don't want to be limited by your strength. And I'll say it's relative strength. Too many people get caught up in the numbers. It's relative strength when we talk about sports performance. But you look at what these guys are like. Guys I know who are competitive at 181, 198. These guys squat, 600, 700, 800 pounds. And so if you're only squatting 300, you've got a lot of room to improve. You might never be a 800 pound squatter because you're not training solely for maximal strength. So obviously, but in terms of relative strength, you got a lot stronger you could be. So, you better learn how to do that. And if it means finding someone who's stronger with you and training with them a couple of days a week, or at least learning from them a little bit, then that's what you have to do. But like I said, once you get in the best shape, if you're out of shape, getting in shape, yeah, your numbers are going to go up. You're always going to go up. You're going to be faster. You're going to be better conditioned. So in terms of sports, your numbers will go up. But once you've reached that point where you're in shape, you're shredded, your diet's perfect, the only thing left is for you to get stronger,
Yeah, it's crazy, man. That's nuts. But, we're getting pretty deep into the call. I mean, we could go on forever. So
yeah, we'll have to do a part two.
And I know you're freaking busy as hell too. But let's just end with this, man. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. You got a new website coming out. It's pretty much already out. So why don't you just talk about that real quick and the mission behind that? Because talking to you about it in San Diego, it's something pretty badass. So just let us know about that.
Yeah, so I'm just about to launch a new site called BuiltStrongAthletics.com. And essentially it's going to be that what we've been talking about today, combining, strength across broad domains. So a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about is just my experiences, what I've gone through, and really how putting it together into an athletic performance program. And so Built Strong, that's the word built obviously is for image, not being a 350-pound powerlifter with a big old gut, but like I said, looking like you're strong, so you're built strong, being strong, and then fit for anything. And so that's kind of the concept with it. And I just really want to help people who, because I always run across people who say, how do I lose weight, get bigger, get stronger? They want to do everything, and I think there is a way to do it, And we were talking about that, talking about how I train and that kind of stuff. So it's just going to go deeper into that, and really it's my spin, taking the conjugate system and applying it into that performance world. And then of course anyone who is a CrossFit or is interested in the CrossFit powerlifting trainer course can go to CrossFit.com for that and look that up. And if you're at the CrossFit Games, come say hi at some point.
Definitely. Awesome, man. Well, again, thank you for taking the time. Like I said, I know you're busy as hell, so I appreciate it. And anything else you want to leave everybody with here, man?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on. And, if anyone wants to follow me, you can follow me on Facebook, facebook.com/AJ Roberts. And Travis, hopefully we do a part two so I can keep talking. I love talking about this stuff.
We'll definitely have to do a part two for sure. And I got to get back out to San Diego because right now it's freaking hot as hell here.
Oh, it's perfect,
man. So it's hot out there too, but you don't have the humidity out here. So
yeah, no, it's perfect here.
It's perfect, man. But
kind of work.
Yeah, dude, definitely. Thanks for the freaking knowledge. We only got into like half of the stuff that I wanted to talk about, but it was all powerful stuff. So if you're watching this, make sure you take action on this and follow up. Connect with AJ. Connect with me if you got questions, and we'll definitely help you out. So that's what we got. Again, thanks, man. Keep living aggressive, getting strong, 110% ham. We're out.